She emerged from the shadows during Ace's most vulnerable moment. When the spotlight caught her silver guitar, Ace Frehley stopped playing completely. The woman's identity would reveal secrets about the Space Ace that even his closest bandmates never knew. It was December 15th, 1987, exactly 5 years after Ace had left Kiss, and he was performing at the Ritz in New York City with his new band, Frehley's Comet. The crowd of 3,000 was electric, packed shoulder to shoulder in the legendary Manhattan venue, and Ace was in peak form despite the demons he'd been battling. He'd already torn through Rocket Ride, Cold Gin, and his signature tune, Shock Me. The audience was mesmerized, watching the man who had defined what it meant to be a lead guitarist in the golden age of rock and roll. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another untold chapter from rock history. As the concert moved into its acoustic segment, something Ace rarely did in those days, he walked to center stage alone. No pyrotechnics, no smoke machines, no flaming guitars, just Ace Frehley and his sunburst Gibson Les Paul, the same model he'd used to record those legendary Kiss albums a decade earlier. This was always the most dangerous part of any show for Ace in 1987. Without the spectacle, without the wall of Marshall amplifiers and the thundering drums, there was nowhere to hide. And Ace had been hiding for a long time. Hiding from memories, hiding from pain, hiding from the person he used to be before the fame consumed everything. He began playing the opening notes to a song that most people in the audience didn't recognize. It wasn't a Kiss song, wasn't a Frehley's Comet track. It was something older, something from before the makeup, before the fame, before Paul Daniel Frehley from the Bronx became Space Ace. The melody was haunting and beautiful, filled with a longing that seemed to pour directly from Ace's soul through his fingers and into those worn guitar strings. The Ritz fell silent. 3,000 people captivated by this rare glimpse of vulnerability from a man who had spent years hiding behind silver face paint and a carefully crafted persona. But as Ace played the second verse, something extraordinary happened. A second guitar began harmonizing from somewhere in the darkness at the back of the stage. At first, Ace thought it was his rhythm guitarist jumping in early, but something about this playing was different. The notes were perfect. The timing was flawless. But more than that, whoever was playing knew variations and embellishments to this song that Ace had never taught anyone. Variations that made the melody sound more complete than it ever had before, as if this mystery guitarist had been there when the song was first written, had helped shape every note and chord progression. Ace continued playing, but his eyes were searching the darkened backstage area, scanning for the source of this ghostly second guitar. The crowd was transfixed, not just by Ace's playing, but by the ethereal beauty of the unknown guitar weaving through his melody like silver thread through darkness. Then slowly, a figure began to emerge from the shadows behind the drum riser. A woman carrying a vintage Gibson SG walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, as if she belonged there, as if she had every right to join Ace Frehley in front of 3,000 people without an invitation. Security guards started moving forward from the wings, but Ace, without stopping his performance, shook his head slightly to wave them off. Something about this woman, something about her playing, something about the way she moved had captured his complete attention in a way nothing had in years. As she walked closer to the microphone stand, stepping into the dim blue stage lights, Ace could make out more of her features. She appeared to be in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back, wearing faded jeans and a leather jacket that had seen better days. Her fingers moved across the fretboard of that SG with the kind of effortless precision that only comes from thousands of hours of practice, the kind of playing that can't be faked or learned from books. When the woman stepped fully into the spotlight, something unprecedented happened. Ace Frehley, the man who had performed in front of hundreds of thousands of people, who had shared stages with Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, who had survived the insanity of Kiss at their absolute peak, stopped playing completely. His fingers froze on the fretboard. His pick hung motionless above the strings. He stared at this woman as if every ghost from his past had materialized in front of him simultaneously. The woman, however, continued playing, her Gibson SG singing out the melody with such beauty and precision that the audience barely noticed Ace had stopped. Her playing filled the Ritz, carrying the song forward with an emotion that brought goosebumps to every arm in the venue. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 30 seconds. Ace just stood there, his mouth slightly open behind the dark sunglasses he always wore. His body completely still except for the almost imperceptible trembling in his hands. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, but somehow still got picked up by his microphone, he said one word that changed everything. Carolyn. That single name sent shockwaves through the handful of people in the venue who had known Ace in the early days. Before Kiss, before the fame, before everything. Carolyn Mitchell had been more than just Ace's girlfriend in the late 1960s. She had been his musical partner, the person who had taught him music theory when he was still just a kid from the Bronx who could play by ear but couldn't read a note. She had shown him how to write songs, how to structure chord progressions, how to make a guitar sing instead of just scream. More importantly, Carolyn had been the one who had encouraged Paul Daniel Frehley to become Ace, to embrace the persona that would eventually become Space Ace. She had been there in those dingy basement rehearsal spaces in the Bronx, helping him develop the cool, mysterious stage presence that would later captivate millions. And then, in 1971, just as Ace was starting to make a name for himself in the New York club scene, Carolyn had vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, no forwarding address. One day she was there, the next she was gone, leaving Ace with a broken heart and a stack of half-finished songs they'd been writing together. For 16 years, Ace had wondered what happened to Carolyn Mitchell. He'd tried to find her several times, especially after Kiss hit it big, but she had disappeared completely, leaving no trace in an era before the internet made everyone findable. And now here she was on his stage, playing the song they had written together in a Bronx apartment in 1970, the song that had never been recorded, never been performed publicly, never been heard by anyone except the two of them. Carolyn, Ace said again, this time louder, his voice thick with emotions he'd been drowning in Jack Daniels for years to avoid feeling. Is that really you? The woman, Carolyn, smiled through tears that were now streaming down her face, and nodded. Hello, Ace. I've been wanting to play this song with you again for 17 years. The audience was confused but completely captivated. They could sense they were witnessing something profoundly personal and important, even if they didn't fully understand what it was. They could feel the weight of history in the air, the electricity of a moment that transcended a typical rock concert. Ace set down his Les Paul on its stand and walked over to Carolyn. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who had once meant everything to each other, now meeting again after nearly 2 decades of silence and absence and questions that had never been answered. I can't believe you're here, Ace said, his voice breaking in a way his fans had never heard before. I can't believe you're really standing here. I've been at 7 of your shows over the years, Carolyn said into her microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned venue. "I always stayed in the back, always left before the lights came up. But tonight I couldn't stay hidden anymore." "Ladies and gentlemen," Ace said to the audience, his composure slowly returning along with the familiar armor of performance. "I want you to meet someone who changed my life. This is Carolyn Mitchell, and she taught me everything I know about writing music." The audience applauded, still not fully understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing, but recognizing the emotional weight pressing down on the stage. "Ace," Carolyn said, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you in 1971 before I disappeared." Ace looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt completely present, completely sober despite the substances coursing through his system, completely there in a way he hadn't been since before the makeup, before the fame, before everything had gotten so complicated. "I didn't leave because I stopped believing in you," Carolyn continued, her voice strong and clear, filling the Ritz with words that had been 17 years in the making. "I left because I believed in you too much." The venue went completely silent. You could have heard a guitar pick drop on the stage. "In 1971, Carolyn said, you were just starting to get noticed. You had that audition coming up with those guys who would become Kiss. You were on the edge of something massive, and I knew it. I could see it. But I also knew something else." She looked out at the audience, then back at Ace. "I knew that my demons, my struggles with addiction, my instability, all of it would drag you down. I knew that if I stayed, you would choose me over your music. You would try to save me instead of saving yourself. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. I disappeared. I checked myself into a facility in upstate New York and cut off all contact with everyone from my old life, including you." Ace was crying now, tears running down his face, not caring that 3,000 people could see the man behind the sunglasses breaking apart. "Carolyn, you didn't drag me down. Losing you, that's what destroyed me. Do you know how many times I played this song alone in hotel rooms? Do you know how many nights I wondered if you were even alive?" "I know, Ace," Carolyn said softly. "I read about your struggles. I saw what fame did to you. And every time I read another story about your battles with alcohol and drugs, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. I wondered if leaving you had actually protected you or just sent you down a different dark road." "Where have you been all these years?" Ace asked, his voice raw with emotion. "I got clean in 1974, Carolyn said. "I moved to Oregon, became a guitar teacher. I rebuilt my life one day at a time. I got married, had 2 kids, got divorced. I lived a normal life. But I never stopped playing guitar, and I never stopped wondering about you." "Are you happy now?" Ace asked. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Carolyn's smile was sad but genuine. "I found peace, Ace. I found sobriety. I found purpose. But happy? Really happy the way we were happy when we were writing songs together in your mama's apartment? No. I don't think I've been that happy since I left you." "Would you?" Ace said, picking up his Les Paul again. "Would you play with me? Like we used to do? Just one more time?" Carolyn smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she'd worn in front of Ace Frehley in 17 years. "I thought you'd never ask." What happened next became the stuff of rock and roll legend. Ace and Carolyn played that unnamed song from beginning to end, their guitars interweaving in perfect harmony, as if no time had passed at all, as if they were still those young musicians in the Bronx, dreaming about making music that mattered. The audience was mesmerized. People who had come to the Ritz expecting a typical Frehley's Comet show were instead witnessing something far more profound. Two souls reconnecting through music, communicating in a language deeper than words, healing old wounds through 6 strings and wooden bodies, and the mysterious alchemy that happens when the right people play the right notes at the right time. After the song ended, Ace looked at Carolyn with questions written across his face. "Are you still married?" he asked. "Divorced 3 years ago," Carolyn said. "My ex-husband was a good man, but he wasn't a musician. He couldn't understand why I would spend hours playing guitar in the garage, working on songs nobody would ever hear. He couldn't understand that for people like us, music isn't a hobby. It's oxygen." Ace nodded, understanding exactly what she meant in a way only another musician could. "I never found anyone who understood it either," he said. "I mean, I had relationships, I had marriages, but it was never the same. You were the one who got it." The audience was completely captivated by this intimate conversation happening in front of them, understanding they were witnessing something incredibly rare. A real human moment in the middle of a rock concert, stripped of all pretense and performance. "Ace," someone called out from the crowd. "Play another song together." Other voices joined in, and soon thousands of people were chanting, calling for Ace and Carolyn to continue. Ace looked at Carolyn, a question in his eyes. "What do you say? Want to help me finish this show?" Carolyn laughed, a sound like music itself. "I've been waiting 17 years to say yes to that question." What followed was an hour that nobody in the Ritz that night would ever forget. Ace and Carolyn performed song after song together, their guitars having a conversation that transcended the technical and became something spiritual. They played Ace's Kiss classics, but reimagined them as duets, finding harmonies and counter-melodies that transformed familiar songs into something new. When they performed Shock Me, it became a dialogue between 2 guitars, one asking questions, the other providing answers. During their version of New York Groove, Ace's biggest solo hit, Carolyn added embellishments that made it clear she'd studied every note of that recording, honoring it while also making it fresh. But the most powerful moments came when they played the songs nobody knew, the songs they'd written together in 1970 and 1971, songs that had been locked away in Ace's memory for 17 years, gathering dust like vintage guitars in a forgotten warehouse. Each song was a time capsule, transporting both musicians and audience back to a simpler time when the only thing that mattered was the music itself. As the evening wound down, Ace did something that shocked everyone, including his own band members watching from the wings. He unplugged his Les Paul and set it down, then took Carolyn's Gibson SG and held it like it was made of glass. "This guitar," he said to the audience, his voice carrying the weight of history. "This is the guitar I learned to write songs on. Carolyn let me borrow this SG back in 1969, and I used it to write the first real song I ever composed. I gave it back to her in 1971, right before she disappeared, and I've regretted it ever since." He looked at Carolyn. "I've owned dozens of guitars over the years. Vintage Les Pauls, custom Gibsons, guitars worth more money than we ever dreamed of having back in the Bronx. But this SG, this beat-up, road-worn, perfectly imperfect guitar, this is the one I've thought about every single day for 17 years. "Ace," Carolyn said softly, "I kept it because it still had your guitar picks in the case. I couldn't throw them away. Every time I thought about getting rid of this guitar, I would open the case and see those picks with your teeth marks on them, and I couldn't do it." "Carolyn," Ace said, and his voice had changed, become stronger, more certain than it had been all night. "I have something to ask you, and I'm going to ask it in front of all these people because I've learned that the important things in life need witnesses." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm a mess," he continued, brutal honesty cutting through the atmosphere. "I drink too much. I use too much. I'm broke most of the time. And I'm probably going to die young if I don't change something. But the one thing I know, the one thing I've always known, is that I'm a better musician, a better writer, a better person when you're around." The Ritz was so quiet you could hear the ambient hum of the amplifiers. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Ace said. "I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to write music with me again. Come back to New York. Let's finish those songs we started 17 years ago. Let's see if we can create something beautiful out of all this pain and loss. What do you say, Carolyn? Will you make music with me again?" For a moment that felt like it lasted hours. Carolyn just looked at Ace, tears streaming down her face. Then she picked up her SG, played a single, perfect note that rang out through the Ritz like a bell, and smiled. "Ace Frehley, I have been waiting 17 years to hear you ask me that question. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The arena erupted. 3,000 people were on their feet, screaming, crying, cheering for this real-life redemption story happening before their eyes. Ace and Carolyn played one final song together, an improvised piece that they created on the spot. Their guitars weaving together melodies and harmonies that had never existed before and would never exist again in quite the same way. It was music as conversation, as healing, as promise for the future. When the last note faded, Ace and Carolyn embraced on stage, and the audience went absolutely wild. The story of Ace and Carolyn's reunion became legend in the New York rock scene, though it never made mainstream headlines. But for those who were there, for those 3,000 witnesses at the Ritz that December night, it remained the most powerful concert moment they'd ever experienced. Carolyn did move back to New York in early 1988. She and Ace spent the next year writing together, creating some of the most personal and powerful music of Ace's career. The songs they wrote were never commercially successful, never climbed the charts, but they meant more to Ace than anything he'd created during his Kiss years. Finding Carolyn again didn't cure Ace's addictions or solve all his problems. Real life isn't that simple, and demons that deep don't disappear because of one magical night. But their reunion gave Ace something he'd been missing for years. A creative partner who understood him, who could channel his pain into art, who reminded him why he'd picked up a guitar in the first place. The bootleg recording of that night at the Ritz became treasured among serious collectors, not just for the music, but for the incredible story it documented. The story of Ace and Carolyn reminds us that some creative partnerships are so powerful they can survive decades of separation. It shows us that it's never too late for second chances, that true artistic connection transcends time and circumstance. On December 15, 1987, Ace Frehley wasn't just giving another concert. He was being reunited with the person who had taught him that music could be more than notes and chords. For Ace, that night wasn't about recapturing the past. It was about reclaiming a part of himself he'd thought was gone forever.